name Shamsuz so you can Shamsuz so you can call me Jaman.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I apologize for my naivete.
No problem.
All right, Anam, it's really lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. I think I'm going to be introducing you as well at the very end. Can you tell me how you'd like me to introduce you?
I'm a climate change expert and the program lead for Pakistan at the CVFV20 Secretariat.
Okay. Okay, and if I say your name, Anam Rathore, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Anam Rathore. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it. Kanwal, do you need to check anything?
I believe you know how to pronounce my name, so I don't think.
Yeah, I know. That's fair. And you'll be introducing Desta. Oh no, Desta's introducing you. Anyway,
Yeah.
I can introduce everybody. It's fine. I can keep handing the mic. So Desta, how would I pronounce your last name?
Gabra Michael.
Gabra Michael.
Desta Gabra Michael.
Okay.
You can say Gabra Mikhail in my. It's Desta Gabra Michael. You can say. I'm a director for natural resource and agricultural development in Relief Society of Tigray. It's a local NGO since 1991. It's a very old NGO. I'm working for that NGO in the last more than 25 years.
Super.
Since I graduated from university. I'm now also doing my PhD on climate induced droughts impacts on irrigation, small scale irrigation, and resilient livelihood here in Mekelle University, Tigray. I'm doing research on this. So it's much related with the assignment given to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. So I will admit, I am not going to be doing big introductions of folks, as I mentioned when we met the other day, because we don't have a lot of time to do a lot of that, but I do welcome you to share information about yourself in the chat. Share your LinkedIn profile if you have one, if people want to connect with you, use the dialogue, the chat to, for anything that you like, for your contact information, for anything you want to upload in reference to discussions that are happening, anything like that is just fine. Before we switch over, Desta, I just saw your slides a few moments ago. Thank you so much for preparing such a thorough presentation. I want to remind everybody we need to stick to time because we have very tight time for 1 hour. So Desta, for example, I think you have 24 slides, but only 7 minutes to speak. So if you can please, you can use the chat to upload your presentation and just spend the 7 minutes focusing on some key topics. And anything that we don't have time to talk about, those conversations can also continue offline. These things are good for connecting with people afterward. So please stick to the time that's been allotted to you, because everybody here has prepared to speak and we want to give them their time slot to speak what they have prepared. So Sadia will be giving us thumbs up, I think, as the signal when you have 1 minute left to wrap up. So that signal means please wrap up. Please make that transition to the wrap up, okay? And I do wish we had more time. In an ideal world, we would, but we have such an amazing group here that and the other side, it's embarrassment of riches here, right? That we have so many great perspectives to share. We just want to make sure that everyone has some time to share their insights, because we have so much diversity here. Geographies, practical, operational, and research experiences. It really runs the gamut with this group. So thank you very much.
We'll be heading into the main webinar will start in a minute.
Yep.
But I just wanted to highlight something, the issue about where we can have our side discussions, right? I tried to create a chat group and technical issues were happening. I realized that here, there's actually a chat group for just panelists, but it's a bit risky because sometimes you're eager to type in and you're just typing into the bigger webinar. So I'm not too sure. I asked if people could share their phone numbers, but I think it's a bit late now. So I think we can stick to the briefing chat that we had on Teams. And it's only Nishani who is not on that. So I can always have that side chat with Nishani. She's giving me her WhatsApp line just to make sure that we keep the time. Yes. So please keep an eye on the chat, the briefing that we had. That's why we have any prompts we want to give you, we'll put it there. And Nishani, I will have a one-on-one with you on WhatsApp.
And keep an eye on Sadia when she signals you. It is now 1 o'clock, so I really think we need to begin on time. Shall we?
Now. Yeah.
Are you starting it? How does this work? I forget.
Yes, I'll start it here. Okay. So I'm just switching. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So best session to all of us.
Thanks, everybody.
I have a question. Sorry, maybe I haven't seen the poll that I'm supposed to speak on. So what's it actually, what will be the questions in it? Like, what are we asking the audience?
Okay, while we begin the session, perhaps Sadia, you can speak with Anam on the side about how this is going to work. Is that all right?
Yes, sure.
Super. Thanks very much.
Oh yeah, it's 3 already.
Okay, so all right, so let's, super, thanks very much. Now, if we're going to, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, please. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm going to get us started on time. We are recording this session so that if anybody isn't here with us at the start time, they can always come back and watch later. So my name is Sandy Ruxel. I am the research group lead for fragility, conflict, livelihoods, and water at the International Water Management Institute. I'm very pleased to be here for this 4th in our series, in our webinar series, which we call the Flex Learning Series. This is Frontlines Learning Exchange, which is thankfully supported not only by IWMI, but by also the CGIAR Food Frontiers and Security Science Program. So together we've created this webinar series to spotlight how research, practice, and partnerships can come together to strengthen resilience in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So today's session focuses on a critical theme: how humanitarian interventions can support communities in fragile and conflict-affected settings to lead climate adaptation in ways that are locally led and gender responsive, and where water is centered at the heart of these efforts. So before we begin, let me remind everyone that you can use the Q&A function throughout the session to share your questions and your reflections. The panelists and participants we have here also will be engaging with you as we go. So thank you very much for using that function to continue that discussion on the side. Now, to help us open this important discussion, I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Nishani Jayamaha, the co-coordinator of the Secretariat for the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. Nishani, thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. I'm going to turn over to you to share some reflections on why this topic is so urgent and timely. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Sandra, and thanks to IWMI for including the Climate and Environment Charter Secretariat in this webinar as we dive into a topic that's really close to the heart of the humanitarian sector and also to the Charter signatories. And for those maybe who don't know about the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations, it was developed for the humanitarian sector by the sector. It has 7 commitments and acts as a framework for humanitarian organizations to be more resilient, climate smart, and environment sustainable in our programs and operations in the context we work. And to date, we have for over 480 organizations and 14 member states and EU supporters who've signed the charter. And we have a speaker here as well who is a signatory. Just to maybe kickstart, as you said, the conversation, I think I'm not alone when I say that we are seeing an unprecedented loss of lives due to climate impacts and conflicts, leading to grave humanitarian consequences. And as we know, now the humanitarian sector is struggling to meet these rising needs in an era of funding cuts leading to UN and sector reforms. But also the humanitarian reset is looking at going back to basics and focusing on relief and life-saving needs. However, we as a sector are finding that we are no longer, we can no longer keep responding to these shocks by just delivering aid. But we also need to ensure that communities are prepared and are resilient to face these multiple challenges that are only going to increase. So the question is, how do we navigate this complex landscape, right? And the charter signatories themselves in their advocacy priorities have highlighted a more inclusive climate action that recognizes and responds to these specific vulnerabilities and marginalized groups, such as women, men, girls, boys, people with disabilities that need really focused attention. And this is because many at-risk populations, as we well know, are overlooked in climate policy processes and responses at both national and global levels, while, of course, struggling to access funding. And I think the commitment 3 of the charter really focuses on this and calls on the humanitarian sector to embrace the leadership of local actors and communities, and to ensure that local and indigenous knowledge and their expertise is at the center of humanitarian action and decision making. And to this topic, the water is often the first way communities experience climate change, be it floods, droughts, unprecedented rainfall, and in fragile and conflict settings, water insecurity can drive displacement, exacerbate tensions, or even deep inequalities. Yet water can also be an entry point for cooperation, for peace building, and for resilience, right? An equitable and sustainable water management can reduce risk of conflict, strengthen and secure livelihood, and create entry points for women and marginalized groups to lead their own adaptation strategies. And for humanitarians, this means making sure we're designing water interventions that are conflict sensitive, responsive to local priorities, and that are strengthening rather than substituting community-led solutions. So today's conversation is extremely timely and important as we explore and share lessons from organizations who are already working in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and to really see how are they already shifting the power by putting communities at the front and center to take and make the decisions that will impact them, but also at the same time build their own resilience to adapt to a changing climate. So happy to kickstart this conversation, and over to you, Sandra. Looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Super. Thank you so much for those opening thoughts, Nishani. That brings us right to where we need to be as we move into some very interesting presentations. I am going to now pass the mic over to Desta Mikhail. You just told me how I should pronounce that. I apologize for doing that. And he is from the Relief Society of Tigray. And so, Desta, I'd like to turn over to you for the next 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me put my watch. Actually, I'm presenting a local-led adaptation air warning system and peace building through water in Tigray, Ethiopia. Yeah, my organization is an NGO, local grassroots NGO, working in Tigray. It's the northern part of Ethiopia. It's drought-prone areas in Ethiopia since 1991. And we are working on watershed development, water supply, agricultural developments. And the consequence of climate change here in Tigray is the area is very prone, like the other parts of Ethiopia. Droughts and unpredictable weather conditions, shortage of water for irrigation, domestic use, conflict among farmers, and also cultural productivity and food insecurity due to the drought conditions. and also that cause dependence for food aid and post-drought conflict. So through this organization, especially the community-led adaptation and resilience building, REST was the experience of REST working with the community as a community lead adaptation and resilience building to address the drought, induced the water scarcity and related conflict. REST in collaboration with the partners. Community first has initiated local-led adaptation and resilience building, shifting from just creating crisis food aid toward prevention, because REST is also a humanitarian organization, is working for food aid, but what our focus is shifting from supporting as a food aid towards prevention, adaptation, and local leadership, especially through mitigation and adaptation strategies. Community initiatives like watershed development through community-based integrated soil and water conservation, rainwater harvesting, and community initiatives. Because during drought, the problem is shortage of water, but by having the different watershed development activities, so you can maximize the water sources, you know. Even, for example, the water source for irrigation was dams or micro dams, but due to the drought, the quantity of water decreased and it creates a conflict. But by increasing the recharging the groundwater and also having alternative water sources for the farmers, so the conflicts can be managed easily. So using the early warning system also is an adaptation because they get information. So the community leadership in watershed development and water governance, there are watershed committees for integrated watershed development, and also the Iowa Irrigation Water Resource Associations. They are managing and governing the waters, availability of waters, existing water sources, and during the drought and even during the good rain time. So they decide on cropping calendar and also crop choices during the drought, and also increase alternative water sources, surface and groundwater. If in the normal years, normally they are using the surface water, but if there is a drought, they so automatically change to use the groundwater by incurring additional costs for excavation and pumping. So shared water source to reduce the conflict. Delegates and women leadership in water governance also is very important. This is common. So this is one of the water committees, the different community-led committees, Iowa, and also the watershed committees. You can see an example, managing the water. And early warning system, we are also using the early warning system to have information on different meteorological information, especially weather monitoring by having some weather monitoring stations like rain gauges at farmers level, and also capacity building to the farmers, how to manipulate this information, and also we collect feedback mechanisms. So through this, the information normally is disseminated to farmers through various channels, radio, broadcast, SMS, and community meeting, training sessions, where there are also extension workers who are supporting the farmers to interpret. So from this direction, there's one farmer testimonial. Before every drought season brought fear and quarrels due to water shortage, we struggle to irrigate our crops, and sometimes water became a reason for conflict. Now we are store enough water, create alternative water sources, share it fairly, and even during dry times, our harvest is good. For us in Tigray, water is not only about survival, it's how we prepare for drought, share fairly, and rebuild peace together. These changes have not only improved our farming, but also strengthened peace among neighbors. The system helps us prepare for drought, develop alternative water source, share water more fairly, and reduce tensions between farmers. When water is managed together, it not only sustain our crops, also sustain our peace. And you know, the irrigation water is not only used for drought adaptation, but also a means of survival during a war conflict in Tigray in the last war in Tigray in northern Ethiopia. During that wartime, the area was blocked from any entrance of food and humanitarian assistance. So the people were using the water for irrigation to survive themselves. So I think not only for the drought, but for the war, even for the blockage or any conflicts, the water is very important to sustain them and to create a peace among them. So there are some pictorial experience of the community-led adaptation and activities. You can see we use the watershed development like this, as there are different activities implemented within a watershed to create a sustainable, the perennial water source at the downstream of the area, and also to increase the availability of water for irrigation, for domestic use, and also to have alternative water sources even during the drought, to manage the conflict among for the scarce of water. And you can see how the community is mobilizing to harvest rainwater for increasing the groundwater recharge, and how the women is participating in harvesting rainwater and also increasing the groundwater recharge and also discharge of rivers and groundwater tables. You can see different type of soil water conservation, water harvesting structures done by the community, and different terraces, how the rainwater is collected and recharged to the groundwater. This is to prevent the drought, if you store the water under the ground, they can use it, reuse it during the drought, after the drought, I can say. So there are different type of water harvesting and also soil water conservation managed by the community through food for work, as well as free work. They have annually 20 days free work without any payment for every farmer in the village. They have free work mobilization plus a cash and food work, so to harvest rainwater and also to mitigate and adapt the droughts. You can see how the area is recharged, the groundwater is recharged by having the different integrated watershed development activities. There are dams, especially during the normal years, there are dams, but during the drought, the dams, normal dams are dried. So they use different structures like this to harvest the groundwater through check dams and different type of check dams during the drought time. You can see how they use the groundwater to maintain the irrigation in that area, and so how they use the groundwater check dams, different type of check dams. So you can use, so the adaptation and the resilience here is by having alternative water sources and also harvesting rainwater, harvesting the applying integrated watershed development, and also using different water sources for irrigation, different water lifting technologies to irrigate their land, to continue to their land. Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very, very much for that brilliant presentation. A very interesting cases of intervention in Tigray. I know a lot of people probably have questions just like I do, but Desta, thank you very much for those comments. Please watch the Q&A in the chat, and we can engage that way with everybody's questions. While we move on now to my colleague Kanwal Wakar from our IWMI office in Pakistan, to tell us about her work there. Kanwal, can I turn over to you?
Yeah, Sandy, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So, Desta, can you please stop sharing your screen so I can share my screen?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, I hope it's visible to everyone. Is it in a full screen mode?
It's not in full screen mode. We can see
Now?
the slide. Yes,
Now?
now it is.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Sandy. It's a great pleasure for me to take everyone through a case study from Pakistan, where we can see that how local adaptation is emerging during the conflict and fragile settings. And after a very powerful remarks from Nishani, I'm so glad to hear her thoughts on need of gender and social inclusion in our humanitarian settings and adaptation settings. So talking about the, let me take this over here. Yeah. So we know that conflicts and disasters around the world today, they are left an estimated 131.7 million people in need of international humanitarian assistance, and they needed to maintain their life to meet their essential needs for resource security and protection. So while moving towards the Pakistan is facing this extreme climate events in terms of floods, in terms of droughts, which lead to the displacement, and it become a pressing issue. Approximately 8.2 million people were internally displaced, with more than 70% IDPs, which are lacking proper shelter in 2022 floods. And what happens that whenever such a crisis happens, then after and before the such crisis, women and children and the people with the disabilities, they're at the forefront of the challenges, and the gender inequality and discrimination that is already existing, that further increase in the society or in the community. So what we are expecting is that we really need to have an inclusive humanitarian action. And that what does really mean is that to have a humanitarian action that is based on, after understanding the power analysis, understanding and addressing power dynamics in the community, that should focus on intersectional feminism, where we can integrate feminist perspectives in our crisis response. That we really need to be mindful when you're talking about the inclusive humanitarian action, that how we can strengthen community resilience through inclusive efforts. And all of this should be based on evidence-based programming, where we can use data to inform gender-sensitive interventions. But this is ideal situation, but what exactly is happening on the ground is something else. And here I'm going to share the one example from you. This is the one study which IWMI conducted in one of the district of Punjab in Pakistan that's called Rahim Yar Khan. It's comprised to the 4 tehsil. So why we took Rahim Yar Khan as our case study? Because it's a unique case study and it's susceptible to both floods and droughts and locust attack and all other climate extreme events, and also act as a host place and also the affected communities as well. So we collected the data from almost 800 flood climate migrant households. And while talking to them about the very basic needs, when we talk about the basic needs and access to the water, so you can see from this figure that majority of them, they are facing the problem in having access to the water, even for the drinking purpose. Then when we asked about them that how much time does it take them to get the water for drinking purpose, so 35% overall spent between 15 to 30 minutes on an average trip to collect drinking water. And few of them also report even 30 to 60 minutes for this water collection. And yes, for sure, both men and women are responsible for the water collection. But all of us might know this, that women are the primary managers of the water managers for the domestic purpose, for the household purpose. And same has been shown over here in the results, that 60% were the primary women who are responsible for managing the water. And in this picture, you can see across different tehsils. So in this study, we also used our water insecurity scale that's called the IWISE tool. So we use this tool to assess water insecurity level, and it's a 12-item validated tool to measure personal experience of water insecurity. And the results show that over 54% respondents are water secure, but 46% are water insecure. And I'm sure that it's not much astonishing for all of us that who is more water insecure. So the figures you can see from here is that 65% women, they are more water insecure during these situations. So we also use another scale because, again, we always had a discussion about that during these crises, women are the first who cut her food intake and suffer from the malnutrition along with the children. So while using this food insecurity scale, we found that women are more food insecure than men, experiencing higher prevalence of moderate or severe and food insecurity. And the figures also shared over here that 93% of the women moderate or severe and 67% are severe food insecurity. So the one very, I must say, a unique thing about this research was that we also investigated the effectiveness of early warning systems. During this investigation, what we did that we come up with from the very basic level of the access and ownership to the mobile phone, the very first level of digital ecosystem, or very first level of getting the source of information. So you can see that majority of the respondents, they don't own mobile phone. And even if they do, they have a very basic level of mobile phone. phone. They don't use the smartphones. They don't have access to the internet. They don't have the access to the social media from where they can get the early warnings or where they can get the information pre and post these disasters and migration. And even if we look through the gender angle, then the women, they own very less, they have a very less ownership of mobile phone. Similarly, talking about access to the early warnings, so majority of them said that no, we haven't received any early warnings. And the main source of warnings for them was the family members and the community centers. They believed that they were the main source of information for them. Again, talking about having SMS alerts on mobile phone, then majority of them said, no, we haven't received any kind of alerts. We haven't received any kind of assistance that could help them in the migration, or they can help them to relocate to the safer positions or the places. So what is the local adaptation for them during these crises? The source of the information for them or the early warnings is the community centers or the local leaders or the mosques from where they can get this kind of information. SMS alerts were second most preferred, and TV, social media, radio, and WhatsApp were least preferred. They don't have such kind of access. It's kind of maybe a luxury for them during this situation. So not only with the community, we also did a key informant interviews with the local disaster management departments at the federal level, at the provincial level, at the community level. We had interactions, and we tried to understand that what local adaptation is there during these such crises and such disasters. Afterwards, we had conducted a detailed sessions with them, where we shared these recommendations on the basis of these findings to those departments, and we received a very positive response from their side, and they're looking forward to have a further discussion at how we can take this research forward at the institutional level, and where we shared that we need to establish a disaster management coordination platform to strengthen linkages with national, provincial disaster link. Availability of sex desegregated data is very important if you really wanted to have an inclusive kind of plan. So then for the medium term, we really recommended them to have improved temporary shelters with clear roles and responsibilities of relevant agencies, organizations for camp shelter setup, including who will manage logistics, wash services. And we all know that during these situations, this is the biggest challenge that women and young girls and children and the people with disabilities, they suffer through. Then long term, there should be some implementing climate migrant support systems through social media platform is a vital strategy to provide timely and relevant migration information to these people. And the last thing from my side is that this is the figure from the 2025 recent floods which we have faced in Pakistan, and these monsoon season has once again highlighted the escalating need for more inclusive early warning systems. And this is the figure quoted by the National Disaster Management Authority of August 2025, that 695 fatalities, 958 injuries, damage to 2,707 houses, and displacement of this much number of families during these floods. So it really needs a proactive approach rather than we are just waiting for after the disaster. So the potential uptake partners, where we had a series of discussions with the government agencies, and they are more interested to like how we can integrate all these things in our disaster response plans, policies, programs, national provincial disaster management authorities, rescue response authorities, our extension departments, our international humanitarian organizations, IOM, WFP, ICRC. So these are the potential where we can take that, how we can take further this research into the implementation. So with this, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we don't have time, but at the end, maybe.
Thank you very, very much for that, Kanwal. It's really fascinating and very important research. And I know a lot of us are thinking about what does this mean in terms of making it into practice, right? How does that happen? And if anybody has good stories to tell, I'm looking at who's here, and I know many of you work on these issues of anticipatory action, early warning systems, and this question of digital inclusion is a big one that still needs a lot of answers. So if you have experience in that regard, or you have information to share, please, please, please use the chat to share that so we can keep this conversation going. We could do a whole session on that. And maybe at some stage we can. So thank you again, Kanwal. All right, I'm now going to jump straight over to the panel discussion. So we will now, the purpose of this panel discussion is to bring together practitioners and donors working on the front lines of humanitarian response and adaptation, and to hear their perspectives. So again, bridging into this, the stories from the field. So our goal here is to hear their perspectives, in particularly with regard to community-driven, inclusive, and conflict-sensitive approaches on these types of initiatives. So I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists. We have Mr. Shams, I'm going to be terrible. I'm so awful at this. I'm sorry. Shamsuzzaman, did I say that correctly? I'm so sorry. Who is a humanitarian program manager from Islamic Relief based in Bangladesh. We have Ayman Rabi, who is the executive director of Palestinian Hydrology Group, which is headquartered in Ramallah. And we have Lucien Lodenier, who's the regional advisor for water, climate, environment, and DRR from the Swiss Development Agency, based here in Amman, at the embassy here in Amman. So now I'm going to jump over first to you, Zaman, for the first question. I'd like to ask you, from a humanitarian operations standpoint, in the first weeks of a response, what simple practice can bring climate adaptation into water programming decisions so that women and youth help to set priorities and not just get consulted, as we'd say? Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, actually, I'm going to answer this question on the two aspects. One is the proactive and the reactive. So proactive means some of the colleagues, they are talking about the anticipatory actions, and also, during the onset of the disasters. So we have currently using a tool, we are calling it is a humanitarian climate vulnerability and capacity analysis tool that has been piloting in 4 countries right now: Somalia, Ethiopia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and also a light depletion in Bangladesh. So where actually we are using, what the results or the outcome that we have been received, basically, this is one of the most effective and simple practice that we have introduced in the humanitarian arena, and that is at the onset of the humanitarian response, as well as the during, before the disaster strike, like the anticipatory period. So what we have found, that this is basically, like, instead of rushing straight into the supply driven water interventions during the emergency, it's also basically, the way apply this kind of participatory tools for map immediate climate risks and vulnerabilities together with the local affected communities, particularly women and youth. So this basically shifts ownership and also the decisions from the community consultation to community leadership. This is basically shifting power to the communities inform. For example, during the first week of the flood response, women and youth, they sit in the same spaces, and they are kind of jointly identifying the hazards such as water contamination or losses of safe access points, or even the safe spaces for children and women. So they can actually prioritize adaptation options like raising tree walls, or even ensuring menstrual hygiene, or even creatively women friendly distribution points. On the other hand, on like an anticipatory action point of view, before the disaster hit, the same tool actually applied for the communities. Now they're actually in advancing, selecting these kinds of spaces, making preparing them for the protection, or even to protect the loss and damages of their livelihoods and other interventions. So in that case, they're also taking some preemptive actions, and in that way they are actually managing the risks. So this is basically, actually this kind of tool is embedded with the climate risk analysis and community voices together, and this actually allows the women and youth not only to influence their prioritization, but also to shape budget allocations, also scheme selection. They have some kind of also resources in their own community. They're also mapping out this kind of resources and utilizing their own regular works, especially in the emergencies, as well as the anticipatory, before heat of the emergency, that's the trigger when it's made for the any kind of flood or cyclone, in example. So actually, the simple practice is run a kind of rapid HCBC process in the first week, and that also transfer women's and youth from passive consultants and also active decision makers during their in any kind of climate informed water programming. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Zaman, for those examples. You bring us a valuable perspective from the humanitarian side, which I wish I had the time to comment on. But again, for those of you who are able to discuss in the chat, please do. I'd like to turn over now to Ayman. So Ayman, in Palestine's current humanitarian context, with restrictions, excuse me, movement restrictions, various types of damage that are occurring in the territories and displacement, what is one practical move NGOs can take to give communities, especially women and youth, real voice in water decisions while staying conflict sensitive and staying safe?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandy, for the question, and thank you for enabling me to participate in this webinar. Like before going directly to the answer, I'd like just to give you maybe 1 minute brief, because when you talk about for example, access restriction or movement, people might not know exactly what situation that here on the ground. We are talking about more than 1,000 barrier and checkpoints and gate that is controlling the movement and life of Palestinians in the West Bank. Of course, the situation in Gaza, I think you are all following on the news. I don't need to say that more than 166,000 been, of course, killed by the Israeli forces. And of course, most of the people in Gaza displaced. In Palestine, at least in the West Bank, we're talking about more than, let's say, 2,220 attacks on Palestinian, let's say, infrastructure. More than 220 wash structure, water, sanitation, and hygiene structure have been demolished. More than 118 springs have been confiscated by the settlers. And of course, the list is very, very, very huge. So when we talk about restriction, of course, I wouldn't even say restriction, I would say extremely restricted environment that is really extremely risky environment that we are trying to operate and that we're trying to respond. Now, back to your question, Sandy, in terms of what NGO can do in order to facilitate the safe and, of course, conflict-sensitive participation of community, especially women and youth. I think what we can do as NGOs is to create, let's say, a community-based water governance in which we can just create also what we call local water committees, for example. Those local water committees can be part of an overall or a wider water user associations. We can, of course, empower them so that we can enable enable women and youth within those committees to be participants and to be active participants so that their opinion is represented. We can create rules for the participation and their, of course, membership, 40-50% to be women and youth, etc. And then we can also utilize safe meeting places and access, for example, organizing WhatsApp groups, online meetings, small place-specific focus group meetings and discussions. And of course, we can also build the capacity of those groups by mixing, for example, elderly and of course the youth in the same kind of meeting, so that we can ensure that intergenerational knowledge transfer. And as Nishani mentioned at the beginning, of course, this knowledge transfer and traditional knowledge transfer is very, very important, so that we can also make sure that youth also gain some experience. They know about the traditional knowledge and they can keep it and move it for the next generation as well. Finally, in order to remain, of course, neutral as NGO, we need to make this dialogue as neutral as possible, and we need to facilitate it in the best possible way without taking any effect or influence on any group. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ayman. Drawing from more than 30 years of experience operating under these circumstances. Thank you for sharing with us those perspectives. If we had time, the question I would ask you is, when we get down to these local governance schemes to deal with these realities, how do we also ensure sustainability and sustainable use of the resource? So another question perhaps for the chat or for another webinar, but thank you, Ayman, for sharing that with us. I'm now going to turn over to Lucienne. So thank you, Lucienne, for joining us today from Madaba while you're in the middle of a field visit for your work. So I'd like to ask you from a donor perspective, what is the one change that would most effectively bridge the humanitarian development divide and enable local women and youth to lead water adaptation in fragile contexts? Over to you.
Sure. Can you ask also the second question, if you don't mind? So then, because my answers will be related to both.
Yes. So, well, the second question is building on that. How can donors ensure what tools like groundwater monitoring, flood maps, and water diplomacy translate into real local decision making and meaningful control over budgets?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, because actually the two questions are somehow related, and the answers also kind of a mix. I will first give maybe some background information or reflection that we have that do not also necessarily represent the Swiss position, but that's also some personal views that I have on these topics. Firstly, I would like to rebound on something that Nishani said at the beginning, that there is a focus on life-saving activities in the humanitarian aid. And to my view, that's, of course, there are emergencies and there are huge needs, but that's also a risk, because development and humanitarian activities are really related, especially in the area of water and climate change. Climate change is a very slow process, a slow disease, if we can call it this way, that is already impacted, but that will impact dramatically water resources in the future. I hope you hear me well, because I might not have a very good connection. And there are cities where we know in 10 or 20 years, there will be very, very little water, and that will lead to very high humanitarian crisis. But addressing this now is not a humanitarian activity, it's a development activity. So the role of the donor is to keep this in mind and to make sure that we can really work in this nexus approach. But we still have issues, because the budgets are defined usually by the politics, who are saying, no, we want to do humanitarian, we don't want to do development, or the other way around. And that's an issue for us to make sure that our governments really understand that, and the taxpayers as well. And then in our programming, to make sure that we can be a bit flexible on that and try to have a smart programming. So that's one of the decisions we can make, the choices. Then we also have to be very clear on that we are in a phase where we will have to make very difficult choices, because not addressing now humanitarian need is very difficult. But we know at the same time that we have to address it, like water resources issues in the long term. So let's take Syria. What do we want to do now? Do we want to do water trucking, which is extremely costly, not effective, in order to address immediate needs, or do we want to plan ahead and to work on comprehensive groundwater studies and to really understand how climate change is going to affect that, and how that from there we can also influence on policies and governance. Now, this leads me to the topic of governance, and that also allows me to answer the question, how can we include youth and women or minorities, because water supply is not something that we cannot target specific population or group in the population. We do this for everyone, and usually it's a top-down approach from ministries, from water establishment, from water governorate, and we are working with them. We cannot work, at least in Middle East, which is a very urbanized region, we cannot work with very specific groups. Meanwhile, what is very important is to make sure that we listen the voice of these minorities, we can hear them, and that they have a platform to discuss that. And one of the good idea that actually some of our partners in the field are implementing is to develop a more bottom-up approach for governance related to water and to climate adaptation. And in this, like, let's say, previously, Desta, you mentioned Water Users Association. That's something which is very useful. And in these water user committees, we can have strong involvement from youth and for women, and from there to build up a bit more, to go in a higher level, to discuss with authorities, and that's something that will help, that will inform us to have a dialogue at a higher level. And then I come back to maybe the first question: what can we do? Is for me what is very important as a donor, and when we discuss with our partners, is to make sure that all activities that we have, or the partnership that we have, that allow to inform other activities. So we learn from that, and I think that's also something that donors in general should do, is to become a more learning organizations in order to learn from activities and to adapt and to better inform dialogue at different levels. And I think that's it from my side. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lucian, for those thoughts and reinforcing for us the reason why we have to continue to reflect and learn on these together to improve our programming and impact. I'd like to turn over to back over to Zaman for another reflection of experience from a humanitarian agency perspective. Zaman, if I could ask you this question, please. From your standpoint, how should local water or wash committees, oops, sorry, can we have mute, if everybody could please mute. How should local water or wash committees be set up so that lived climate risks such as flooding, drought, salinity directly drive humanitarian priorities and timelines rather than being addressed later in development projects? What are your views on that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The water committee, they're actually the main, actors who can actually, make ensure that the water is for equal, everyone for all, and also how sustainably the resources are managing during the both situation, like the humanity and also the development. So as, Lucian is truly saying that, this is a kind of, there are some, debate on approaches, whether it is humanitarian or development. So yeah, nexus program is the, I think, the solution. The people who are living on the both crisis, the both situation. So the same people actually request support during the emergencies as well as the development. So these kinds of programming should be, developed on the, both lenses, like how it can work during the emergencies as well as how it can be working during the development. So if the climate things has been considered during the planning, so this can be actually adaptable, usable for any kind of, situation. So now coming back to the, again, the water committees. So in different region, in different context, there are different types of, methodology as well as structures have been developed. But whatever the structure it is, if the actually committee or community, the water committee or the community is truly, actually ensured the overall participation, like when it comes to the people with disabilities or women, children, youth, as well as the experts. This is also requires, sometimes this is a kind of expertise work, it might not work. There are some kinds of, repair maintenance might be essential. So when actually developing the capacity of these kinds of community or the group, so organization should also focus the, like the technical aspects as well. So giving or orient them like kind of, repair maintenance, or also providing some kinds of toolbox, and also with the orientation that actually, make help to, do kind of a small repair and maintenance, as well as, the contingency management. So truly community participation is essential. Whenever we are also hearing from the trigger experience and also from Pakistan experiences, this is again like the how efficiently these water groups are functioning, that actually depends on. So yes, in there are some circumstances in terms of, the structures, the government aspects, as well as, the situation, the context, and also the structure. So that is actually, depending how truly ensuring the community participation with the overall aspects, not only the managing but also the selection. It actually should comes from the selection. If the needs are there, if the prioritizations are making on that kinds of, lens, the inclusivity lens is another angle, like that is also ensured that whole communities are participating and getting access of this kind of supports and facilities. I think. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Zaman. I'd like now, for our last question on the panel, to turn over to Ayman for one last question on the broader perspective from the NGO side. From your perspective, Ayman, what is one realistic way that the international community can stay adaptable? So flexing rules, shifting funding, adjusting timelines to align humanitarian aid, development, and climate finance on water. And what would you need as an NGO to make that work in practice? Over to you, Ayman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandy. I think all of the above, Sandy. I mean, I think flexibility is perhaps the secret word for funding, especially in the context of humanitarian and emergency situation. So this fund need to be really flexible, and of course need to be pooled in a way that enables access to the fund in the time that it is needed. Let's see, especially in our context here, because we are seriously facing not one single, let's say, side of the story. We are facing, or we might need to address triple burden at the same time, like addressing this kind of occupation impact on the situation, on the humanitarian situation, to respond to the damaged infrastructure, and at the same time to increase the resilience of the community toward like facing this impact of the climate change. So this is something that we definitely need to address simultaneously, and therefore, if the fund is not flexible enough, it will not enable us from addressing this in the same time. Of course, this is important to have it like in place. But of course, what is the flexibility that we might be talking about? Of course, adaptive programming is one of the key issues. Of course, the donor or funding has to be on a multi-year basis. On a pool fund, it can be, of course, allocated based on the emergency situation or the emerging need that we are talking about. Of course, whether it is infrastructure rehabilitation or climate resilience or adaptation or other thing. And of course, we need also to make sure that there is a let's say, harmonized way of reporting, and of course tackling this issue with the donor. And then we need to just have kind of rules, clear rules on where we can shift, where we can reallocate, simplify the bureaucracy in terms of like reporting, and not to take, let's say, much time in approving reallocations based on these kind of situations. So these things, of course, can be also accompanied with some sort of orientation or capacity building for NGOs in terms of like the reporting requirements, in terms of like what is like the best practice in terms of like shifting, and how we can shift, and where and when we can and we cannot, and how we can really also refrain from doing any kind of things. And therefore, this is very important also to have a kind of a technical support guidelines on for the NGOs on how to really just modify if needed, and of course act on the ground as needed. So I think this might form a kind of an overall framework that will enable NGOs to act on this triple burden that I mentioned at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ayman. So as we think about this going forward, it's not just about trying to develop a strategy in such a dynamic situation, but it's about conducting the diagnostic work that needs to be done for that to be an evidence-driven strategy, and dealing with how the financing works and all of the administrative and political elements of that. We also heard a little bit about how donors are dealing with their constituencies. It's a multi-layered dilemma. Again, I'm sure there are a lot of lessons in the room to share on that, and please continue sharing those within the chat, and share your contact information if you're interested in keeping these conversations going afterward. I'd like to thank the panelists very, very much for your perspectives. A lot of diverse experience here, and a lot more that we can do together. So thank you for sharing everything that you have. Thank you for your candor. And I'd like to now turn us over to the closing provocation from Anam Rathore, who is a youth climate leader from Pakistan, from CVF V20. Am I saying that correctly? And so then I'd like it to turn it over to you, Anam, for those comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you to all the panelists and the participants for this very engaging and, as you rightly said, diverse discussion. And I really appreciate the perspective that we heard today, because we heard from Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Palestine, Jordan, Pakistan, and beyond. And it was really inspiring to see that how all these different contexts and how they're all navigating the shared challenge that when we talk about building resilience in fragile settings. So from what I heard in the session today, it's very clear that financing and institutional support is one of the biggest challenge when we talk about locally led adaptation. And as we've heard stories that communities, they have the vision, they have the knowledge, they have the lived experience, but what they lack is access to the resources and authority to actually implement solutions at scale. And as I said, for me, this result, this discussion and this point isn't surprising, but it is a powerful reminder to us that, where our efforts must be focused. And as we heard, a lot of organizations and that's what they're focusing on, but it should be at a bigger level. And, we talked about and how this specific discussion today is about shifting power. And, it means giving communities the decision-making space. We talked about bottom-up approach. We talked about flexible financing flows, as Eamon said. And we also, and the technical tools that we need to lead their own, these communities, they need to lead their own adaptation pathways. Humanitarian interventions in particular, they must be designed again to enable and strengthen local leadership, the local learnings, not replace them. This is something Nishani said in the start, that embrace the leadership of the local actors, and I really agree with you on this 100%. We also saw, we discussed today how water, which is a basic, again, but yet a very contested resource, and it can either drive tension or it can become an entry point for peace building. We need inclusive and conflict-sensitive approaches to water management, which can safeguard food and water security, but also building trust between communities. And this will only work if women and or gender minorities, youth, and marginalized communities are fully part of the process. Some of the examples that we saw from Pakistan about how much this gender disaggregated data is used, we need all these things, and because they are not on the margins of adaptation, they are central to it, and it's really important that they become a part of these discussions and these decision makers and these decisions. Again, something that Desta said earlier that I really agree with, that we need to use water as a bridge and not as a barrier. So again, as we close today, I want to leave with a call to action that, let's ensure that we take what we've heard today and translate into actual practice. We're all working in this sector, and it's, we have to ensure that when we talk about finance, it reaches the local level, that conflict sensitivity is built into every adaptation program, and that we continue building partnerships with these communities that genuinely respect and elevate the local indigenous knowledge and then the lived experience of those communities. Because advancing inclusive pathways for adaptation and peace isn't just about, surviving climate risks. We have to ensure that, we're creating the conditions that communities can thrive on. Especially, we have to focus that, they thrive on, but they thrive on with dignity, with resilience, and also with hope. So, yeah, again, as we've seen today, true resilience begins when people most affected are the ones shaping the solutions. As we said, they are central to these discussions. So yeah, I think that's from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anam, for those hopeful reflections. Really, really appreciate that. I like that, Kanwal. So thank you again for your thoughts. I would like to now turn us over for some closing words to my colleague, Johan Geli from IWMI. He's our director for impact in our Asia programs. Before I do that, I just want to give one shout out that we do have another webinar next week, same time, October 9th. And this one will be focusing on youth participation in circular bioeconomy solutions and looking at some very interesting experience that IWMI has had in humanitarian situations and others with other partnerships, especially in refugee camps. So please join us for that session. I am now, though, going to turn over to you, Johan. This is your floor to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very sorry to join you. Good afternoon to all of you. Very sorry to join you just 35 minutes ago. I was on a call with the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, where the issue of climate change resilience has been discussed, of course. First of all, Anam, congratulations. You are really an influencer. I'm now looking at your LinkedIn. You have close to 10,000 followers, and I like your call, the call you've been issuing a month ago, calling all climate innovators in Pakistan. On so many comments, on so many input. Congratulations. I'm looking forward to seeing you, by the way, during the International Karachi Conference on the Pakistani's Water Week. I will be in Pakistan. Just, Sandy, 4 comments around 4 elements. The first one is the need, and this is not new, but the need for donors, but also for us, NGOs, the international communities, but also national government, etc., to reinforce and strengthen the continuum of the nexus, unfortunately, between humanitarian and development in many places of the world. We still have a huge gap and divided, and that is really a pity. So to address the issue of climate resilience at community level, the continuum of the nexus is absolutely key between humanitarian and development aspect. The second one is political awareness. Again, and I'm here today, this week at IWMI in Colombo. We are having a 1-week training workshop for representatives from the Pakistanese Meteorological Association, disaster risk agencies, etc. And everybody was mentioning the lack of political awareness, unfortunately, on one side, and the lack of investment on prevention on the other side. And that is really a pity. Countries normally they are in position to find financing for emergency situation, but when it comes to prevention, unfortunately, due to lack of political awareness, access to finance is an issue. So this is the second one. The third one, which is very important, and it has been mentioned by some of the intervenants, and I will capture it under the issue of citizen science. If we want to empower the community, citizen science is absolutely key. And for example, at IWMI in northern part of the country, in dry zone of Sri Lanka, we are school students, but also householders. They are in charge of monitoring the level of groundwater table. They are monitoring with specific needs. They have been trained to monitor. So the involvement of communities in the issue of climate resilience can be easily done. Another example from SDC side, Lucien, 20 years ago, I was in Peru, and we were also providing curriculum for secondary school, but also at university for communities in Andean region, for them to assess and to map the risk in their communities. And this was part of the curriculum in secondary school, but also university. So citizen science is part of a way for us to empower the communities to address the issue of climate change resilience. And the last one is private sector participation. And again, congratulations, Anam, for this call for climate change innovator. Many companies, even in marginal countries, in countries suffering from economical crisis, you have companies from private sector which have big assets in some places, which has to be protected. And I think the contribution of the private sector towards with communities to address the issue of climate change is absolutely key. And I think that private sector which are present in dry zone or in mountainous areas subjected to flash flooding, they have a contribution in terms of capacity building, they have a contribution in terms of technology, and they have a contribution in terms of financing support to the communities to improve and to increase resilience. So this is what I wanted to say, and I was very happy to join at least part of the webinar. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Johan. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for those of you who stayed the extra 4 minutes after the hour. We really appreciate it. This will go up online, so you can share the recording with anyone who is unable to attend today. Again, thank you for everybody for taking the time, for sharing everything you have with us, and we look forward to the next discussion.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
So much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.